So I guess that links in nicely with role models and rites of passage. And so what we're trying to do is establish why dads are important in their early days, in their childhood days, and in the start of puberty. Why dads play this paramount role. It's not like dads need to be absent through birth to childhood and then make an appearance in adolescent. From the day the babies come out of the womb until right through to about 12, I think 11 or 12, I think these days are now for puberty for boys, that dad needs to be actively influencing the boy's decision. And so when he hits puberty, has the signs of puberty, then role models and rites of passage become a really, really important part. So historically, rites of passage symbolize the ending of childhood. And I think that's important. I think people need to understand that childhood does end, and adolescence begins, and adolescence is purely about preparation for adulthood. And adolescence ends, and then adulthood begins. And so I think it's important when we talk about rites of passage, it's talking about, well, you were a boy, now you're transitioning into a man. And I think that language needs to be sort of strong in that sense to really communicate a strong message that there is a time when you're going to have to put the Nintendo paddle stick down and you're going to have to take on responsibilities in the community such as work or study and things like that. And the beginning of journey into manhood. So from what can be understood, the rites of passage for both genders start at the visible signs of puberty. Most cultures remove boys from the company of women to the company of men. Here the boys learn the ways of being a man and will go through some form of rite so that he can be recognized upon return that he is a man and is ready for duties associated for that. So you've got to understand that men think in terms of solution-focused activities. So they don't necessarily think emotionally about their masculinity or their manhood. Really, defining their manhood is by defining what they do, or defining their masculinity is by defining what they do. So in the old days, say in some cultures, they take them off, they do some initiation work, and they come back and they take on roles and responsibilities within the tribe. Now you're responsible to look after the herd, and you've got to protect the herd, those sort of things. Now, in an urbanized sort of world that we live in, particularly in Australia, that sort of stuff just doesn't exist anymore. So it's a real challenge for us to say to boys, right, we need to go through this process with you, but what's the safe and realistic way of doing that? Next slide, please. The rites usually involve some sort of risk. Now, we've sort of taken away a lot of risk from boys, and you know, I know parents, and particularly me, we don't want kids come home with broken arms and broken legs and you know, bruises on their head or whatever. But it's just the way the boy brain is wired. We like risk. We like the idea of risk. That's why hooning in cars is such an issue these days, because boys just get the opportunity to take those really dangerous risks. And they might think they've got the skill and the ability, but they lack the wisdom. And again, here's where Dad sort of steps in and understands the idea of risk. And he goes, yeah, son, you can do 150 down the freeway, but wisdom has taught me that usually at 150, either you're going to kill yourself or you're going to have a car accident and kill somebody, and you're probably going to live with that consequence for the rest of your life, and the guilt and the shame associated with that. So there's that language, again, that dads can bring to the table that, yep, you can do that, but this is possibly the outcome. And the boys are probably going to listen to a lot of that if it's coming from the right place. So there's usually the first hunt in some indigenous cultures, some trials and certain practices. This is done under the governance of other men, and I think one of the keys here is that all this stuff that we're talking about affirms his masculinity. He comes out knowing that I am now going to be a man, you know, this is me, this is my masculinity, this is who I am. It's really, really important, I think. Next slide, please. It's a given for a boy that he's different from his mum and his sisters. So when time comes, he is in the company of men. He learns that men think differently. So we do. We think very, very differently to women. Men focus on different things. So our priorities are different. So in certain traditions, it's like we're the breadwinner, we go to the home. But all that's changing for boys. So, but there's still fundamentals that we do think differently and we do act differently. Men focus on different things. It comes in circumstances. It can, in some circumstances, allow him to see the final outcome of maturation or maturity. In all this experience, the boy is spiritually, physically, and socially validated. So in the summary, it's sort of like, so this is what it's about experience. And I think that last statement's missing for a lot of boys. They don't know what it's all about, and it's sort of like we've got a generation of lost boys in this sort of undiscovered country, and they have got very little in terms of people coming along and allowing him to have this, So this is what it's about experience. This is what it means to grow up. This is what it means to take on responsibility. This is what it means to take risks, but also know that I need to hear the voice of wisdom in a lot of things. Yeah. So next slide, please. Boy learns about his strength. So boys, through this process, can understand that, yeah, I've got muscles, I've got testosterone surging through my body, I like to wrestle, I like to fight, and if dad's around or there's older males around, they can actually govern the strength of the boy, and they can teach him how to use his strength, how to manage the challenges of testosterone. It's really quite an issue for boys, especially around 11 or 12. It's sort of, the brain tells the body it's ready for change, and it's sort of like injects this testosterone, and it becomes this emotional roller coaster for boys. In some cases, I've had boys in my office that they just say to me, there's some days when I just cry and there's no real reason for me crying, and it's just because the hormones are changing and things are changing for them at such a rapid rate. And if dad isn't around, or uncle's not around, or granddad's not around to explain that this is normal, then the boy sort of gets a little bit confused in that. But so the rites of passage, or dad involved in that process, sort of helps him understand that, and how testosterone does create strength. The boy learns about his obligation to the tribe, so he learns about responsibility. He learns that this is my role, this is my place, this is where I fit, and it's not permanent. There will be transitions into different roles and different responsibilities, and some of that can lead to marriage, and some of that leads to being a warrior, or to be, a spiritual person in the community. There was all these sort of roads that the boy could take. At the moment, in a very postmodern sense, it's sort of not there at the moment unless they want to go to university or pick up a trade. But the role in community is interesting, and it's one that sort of, when you see kids walking around, you just sort of wonder, what role are they going to play in the future in terms of the governance of the community, and are they going to be positive citizens, or are they going to have challenges fitting in here? They can be taught about spirituality, so they can learn a lot about that. For example, in certain indigenous cultures, they learn about dreaming and certain places of meaning and all that sort of stuff. So we've got some ideas that might help. So if you're working with dads, or you're working with young males, make time for father and son weekends away with other good men and boys. So sort of coach dad that he needs to get a community of men around himself, because dad on his own can't do it. So there needs to be a community of good men, and they need to be able to fellowship, if I can use that word, in a way that's just going to be fun and celebratory, and it's just going to be safe, and it's going to be really cool, and the boys get to learn and be challenged as much as the dad is. Ensure that the household is positive about men. A lot of stigma around men at sometimes, and it sort of ebbs and flows, comes and goes. But I think it's important that even if it's a single parent home, that it sort of portrays a positive image of men, because not all men are bad. Find memorable ways to celebrate your son's rites of passage. So it might be a trip into the bush and, go and shoot kangaroos if you're allowed to do that sort of stuff, or it could be other things. Be creative, but make it memorable and make it positive, and include him in significant moments for older family members. So when it's a big celebration for granddad and grandma, if they're around, or an older uncle or an older auntie or something, just include him in that process. Don't exclude him. It's really important. Yeah, next slide, please. Encourage friendships with family and friends across the generations. Don't fall into the idea that they need to hang around with their peers all the time. Sort of coach and encourage that it's okay to befriend the auntie who's 60, or just to get them to see life from a different perspective is probably what I'm trying to say there. Talk regularly about qualities most admired in good men in a relaxed and engaging way. So find out good qualities. So, work ethic is probably a good quality. Good study practices, or people who are in the armed forces doing good things for their country is probably a positive thing, besides killing people. But they're making a contribution to society. Just things like that, and just opportunities to say, these are good guys, and these are the qualities that make them good guys. Make your home a place of interesting stories about men and boys from your own family history and beyond. So again, it's that place where it's, it's okay to be a male, it's okay to be a bloke, and it's okay to talk about these things. I think it's really, really important.